Failure has a way of shaking us at our core. It doesn't just slow us down, it questions everything we believe about ourselves. When failure hits hard, it can feel like the universe is telling us we're not enough, not capable, or not ready. But the truth is far simpler. Failure is feedback, it is information. And those who learn to keep going despite it, those who choose to stay in motion, become the ones who eventually lead, inspire, and succeed. Every person who has made an impact in this world has faced moments where walking away felt easier than continuing. What separated them from the rest wasn't talent or luck, it was the decision to rise one more time than they fell. This decision doesn't come from motivation. It comes from clarity about why you're doing what you're doing. To keep going when failure hits hard, you need to understand that failure is not a verdict. It's a signpost. It points you toward what needs improvement, what needs to be learned, and what needs to be changed. When you see failure as data instead of identity, you reclaim your power. You shift from, why did this happen to me? To, what is this trying to teach me? One of the most important things you can do is create structure. When emotions take over, structure brings stability. Build routines around your work, your recovery, and your learning. When life feels shaky, a routine gives you something steady to hold on to. Systems protect you when motivation disappears. But persistence requires more than systems. It requires perspective. Most people zoom in too close to their failures. They stare at the mistake until it becomes the only thing they see. Instead, zoom out. Look at the bigger picture. One bad chapter doesn't define the whole story. Your journey is long, and failure is only one paragraph. And then comes courage not in the loud, heroic sense, but in the quiet decision to try again tomorrow. Courage is built through consistent action, not through perfect outcomes. Every small step you take after failure builds resilience. Every time you show up again, you send a message to yourself, I may not have won today, but I'm not done. The truth is, progress doesn't happen when everything is easy. Progress happens when you refuse to stop in the moments that challenge you the most. Failure is uncomfortable, but it forces growth. It removes illusions. It teaches humility, and it strengthens character in a way success never could. If you can learn to walk with failure instead of running away from it, you unlock a kind of strength that most people never reach. You begin to realize that failure is not the opposite of success. It's a part of it. And eventually, you'll look back and see that the very moments you thought would break you became the moments that shaped you. So keep going, even when it hurts, even when it feels impossible, even when every part of you wants to quit. Because the version of you that exists on the other side of this struggle is stronger, wiser, and far more capable than the one standing here today. Fake chaos of failure is feedback, not identity. Use it as information to improve. Clarity of purpose gives you the strength to rise after every setback. Structure and routines protect your progress when motivation fades. Zoom out from the moment. Failure is only one part of your bigger story. Resilience is built through consistent action, especially when continuing feels hardest. Failure is feedback, not identity, and understanding this single idea can transform the way you show up in life. Most people treat failure as a label, a stamp that defines who they are. They fail once and begin to believe they are failures. But failure was never meant to shape your identity. It was meant to shape your direction. When something doesn't work, it is simply the world giving you information. It is data about what needs to be adjusted, strengthened, or reinvented. The problem is that we grow up learning to attach emotion to failure instead of curiosity. When we fail, we don't ask, what can I learn from this? Instead, we ask, what's wrong with me? That shift from analysis to self-attack is what destroys confidence and prevents growth. When you start seeing failure as feedback, you stop taking it personally. You begin to observe it like a scientist. A scientist doesn't get upset when an experiment doesn't work. They take notes, analyze variables, and try again. Imagine if you treated your own efforts with that level of neutrality. Imagine if instead of feeling defeated, you simply asked, why didn't this work? What can I do differently next time? Failure becomes far less painful when you remove the emotional weight attached to it. And when something hurts less, you become more willing to attempt it again. That willingness is the foundation of persistence. There is something powerful that happens when you detach your identity from your outcomes. You give yourself permission to evolve. You create space to try, make mistakes, and try again without the fear of being defined by the attempt. Failure stops being a wall and becomes a doorway. This mindset allows you to take risks others avoid. Most people play small not because they lack talent, but because they are terrified of being embarrassed or judged when something goes wrong. But when failure is just feedback, embarrassment becomes temporary and judgment becomes irrelevant. What people think about your failure doesn't matter nearly as much as what you choose to learn from it. Think of the people you admire, the innovators, leaders, athletes, creators. Every one of them has failed more times than they succeeded. The difference is that they never allowed failure to decide who they were. They used it as a compass. If something failed, it meant something about their strategy, not their worth. They learned to separate the self from the situation. When you do the same, your resilience grows. You stop breaking down every time something doesn't go your way. You begin to understand that each setback is simply showing you what your next step should be. Failure also exposes blind spots, areas you didn't know needed attention. Without failure, you would keep repeating the same actions without improvement. It forces you to confront your weaknesses, refine your approach, and think differently Sometimes failure redirects you entirely. You may discover that something you were chasing wasn't aligned with your true abilities or values. Or you realize that you were using the wrong approach even though your goal was right. In both cases, failure is guiding you, not punishing you, and you adopt the mindset that failure is feedback. You start responding rather than reacting. Reacting means taking failure emotionally, shutting down, and walking away. Responding means analyzing the situation and making an intentional adjustment. Growth comes from response, not reaction. This is how people become better over time. Every failure becomes a building block, each one adding to your strength and understanding. The truth is, you cannot avoid failure if you're doing anything meaningful. The only people who never fail are those who never try. So the question is not whether you will fail, but how you will interpret the failure when it comes. If you see it as a reflection of your identity, you will collapse under its weight. But if you see it as feedback, you will rise with more clarity than before. When you shift your relationship with failure, you also shift your relationship with success. Success stops being something fragile that can disappear with one mistake. It becomes something you can build continuously because you're no longer afraid of the necessary mistakes along the way. You start to realize that every great success story is simply a collection of lessons gathered through failure, analyzed with patience and used with intention. And when you understand that, you unlock a level of determination and confidence that failure can no longer shake. Clarity of purpose gives you the strength to rise after every setback because purpose is the anchor that keeps you steady when everything else feels uncertain. Most people underestimate the power of knowing why they're doing something. They focus on goals, deadlines, and outcomes, but rarely on the deeper meaning behind their actions. Goals can change, motivation can fade, and circumstances can shift, but purpose is different. Purpose is the internal engine that keeps you moving even when the path becomes difficult or discouraging. When you're clear about why you're working towards something, failure becomes an obstacle, not a dead end. Purpose gives meaning to struggle. Without it, challenges feel pointless and setbacks feel like confirmation that you should quit. But with purpose, even the hardest days have direction. Think about moments in your life when you pushed through something difficult. Chances are you did it because you cared deeply about what was on the other side. That emotional connection is what kept you going. Purpose acts like a compass. When you lose your way, when things fall apart, when failures begin to shake your confidence, your purpose guides you back to the path. It reminds you that the struggle is part of something bigger than the pain of the moment. Clarity of purpose also creates resilience. When people aren't clear about why they're pursuing something, every failure feels heavier. They begin to question the value of the journey itself. They start wondering if the effort is worth it and whether they should abandon the goal altogether. But when your purpose is crystal clear, you don't quit because the road is hard. You adjust, you adapt, you learn, and you continue. Purpose makes you emotionally resistant to setbacks. It doesn't eliminate pain, but it gives the pain a place in the story. When you have clarity, you develop a stronger tolerance for discomfort. You become willing to do things others avoid. Purpose fuels discipline, and discipline creates consistency. When things go wrong, and they will, your purpose helps you rebuild your energy, focus, and commitment. Instead of seeing failure as a sign to stop, you see it as something to move through. This shift in mindset is what separates people who only start things from those who actually finish them. Many people begin with excitement only to quit the moment the excitement wears off. But purpose-driven individuals move past excitement into intention. They rely on meaning, not mood. Clarity of purpose also reshapes your decision-making. When you know what truly matters to you, you stop wasting energy on distractions. You stop comparing your journey to others because their purpose is not your purpose. You stop doubting yourself every time a failure shows up because your focus is not on the moment. It's on the mission. With purpose guiding your decisions, you spend less time reacting emotionally and more time responding strategically. You begin to ask better questions. What does this setback teach me? What can I adjust? What should I let go of? What matters most here? Another powerful aspect of purpose is that it creates consistency. Progress is rarely about big leaps. It comes from small, repeated actions. But small actions are hard to sustain without a deeper reason behind them. When you're clear about why you're doing something, consistency becomes easier. Even when motivation disappears, purpose steps in to keep you moving forward. You don't rely on feeling ready, you rely on being committed. Purpose also strengthens your self-belief. When you know why you're on a journey, you feel more connected to it. It becomes part of who you are. Failure can shake your confidence, but purpose rebuilds it. It reminds you that the journey is valuable whether you are winning or stumbling. This understanding helps you recover faster from setbacks because you're not just chasing results, you're living your mission. Clarity of purpose also attracts support. When people see that you are driven by something meaningful, they are more willing to help guide or work with you. Purpose inspires trust and respect. It communicates seriousness and intention. And when you're surrounded by people who understand what drives you, you gain strength in moments when you feel weak. Ultimately, clarity of purpose is the emotional fuel that keeps your heart aligned with your effort. When failure hits hard, purpose gives you the strength to get up again. It reminds you that the story isn't over, that setbacks are temporary, and that the mission matters more than the moment. It lifts you from frustration to focus and turns defeat into determination. With purpose guiding you, you become unstoppable, not because you never fall, but because you always rise with direction. Structure and routines protect your progress when motivation fades because motivation by nature is inconsistent. It rises when everything feels exciting, and it disappears the moment life becomes overwhelming, boring, or difficult. If your ability to move forward depends only on motivation, you will always struggle with inconsistency. But when you build structure around your goals, when you create routines that guide your actions, you remove the need to feel inspired every day. You replace emotion with intention. You replace unpredictability with stability. Structure becomes your safety net. There will always be days when you wake up tired, drained, or discouraged. Days when failure from yesterday is still sitting heavily on your mind. Days when you question your abilities or feel like your efforts aren't leading anywhere. In these moments, discipline feels hard and motivation feels non-existent. This is where structure steps in as a silent, dependable support. It tells you what to do even when your mind is full of doubt. It holds you accountable when your emotions try to weaken your commitment. Structure doesn't ask you how you feel. It reminds you of what you've committed to. Routines also give your mind a sense of familiarity and predictability. When everything else in life feels chaotic or uncertain, a routine becomes a steady rhythm that helps you stay grounded. You don't have to think about what comes next because your system already guides you. This reduces mental stress and saves energy for the tasks that truly matter. Most people underestimate how much decision-making drains them. When you haven't built routines, you spend energy deciding how to begin instead of actually beginning. Structure eliminates that friction and makes action more natural. When failure hits hard, routines become even more essential. After a setback, your confidence is shaken, your thoughts become scattered, and your emotions often push you toward quitting. But a routine doesn't care about the emotional chaos. It gives you a small, manageable way to stay in motion. Even a tiny step forward can break the heaviness of failure. When you keep showing up through structure, you remind yourself that failure hasn't destroyed your ability to act. That simple reminder is powerful. It keeps you connected to progress. Another important aspect of structure is that it builds trust within yourself. Every time you follow your routine, even on the days when you don't feel like it, you strengthen your self-belief. You prove to yourself that you can rely on your own commitment. And once trust in yourself grows, failure loses some of its power. You no longer see failure as something that stops you. You see it as something you can work through because you've built the systems that help you move anyway. Trust grows through consistent action, and structure ensures that consistency. Routines also reduce emotional volatility. When people rely on motivation, their progress rises and falls depending on their mood. But structure stabilizes that emotional roller coaster. You may still feel disappointment or frustration after failure, but your routine keeps you anchored. You don't spiral into self-doubt as easily because your action plan is already set. You simply follow it. This makes your progress more predictable, more steady, and more sustainable. There is also a psychological benefit to routines. You begin to associate specific actions with specific states of mind. For example, a morning routine that includes reflection or planning trains your mind to enter a focused state at the same time each day. A work routine trains your mind to shift from distraction to concentration. A recovery routine trains your mind to relax and recharge. These associations make it easier to perform these actions even when you're emotionally drained. Your brain begins to follow the pattern naturally. Structure also helps you break big goals into manageable pieces. One of the reasons failure feels overwhelming is because it makes the destination seem far away. But a routine breaks the journey into small, repeatable steps. You don't have to conquer the whole path at once. You just follow today's step. And when you complete that step, you create momentum. Progress becomes less intimidating and more achievable. Small steps done consistently create the same results that motivation only dreams about. A powerful thing happens when your life is guided by structure. You become less reactive and more proactive. Instead of waiting for motivation to strike, you create progress through systems. Instead of being controlled by your emotions after failure, you are guided by routines that keep you steady. Structure becomes the invisible force that carries you through days when your spirit feels heavy. It turns perseverance into a habit rather than a struggle. Over time, it becomes clear that success is not built on perfect days. It's built on structured days. And those who rely on structure are the ones who continue moving even when everything else tells them to stop. Zooming out from the moment allows you to see failure as only one part of a much bigger story. Because when you are stuck inside a setback, it feels enormous. It fills your entire mind. It becomes all you can think about. And in that zoomed-in state, failures look final. They look permanent. But they are not. They are moments. Painful moments, yes, but still just moments. When you step back and widen your perspective, you begin to recognize that the chapter you're living right now is not the whole book. It's simply a scene in a much longer journey, and scenes, no matter how intense, eventually pass. People often allow one failure to define their ability, their future, or their worth because they're standing too close to it. Imagine placing your face right in front of a wall. The wall looks huge. It looks endless. But take 10 steps back and suddenly that massive wall becomes just one part of a larger landscape. Failure works the same way. When you zoom out, you realize that this one setback is surrounded by opportunities, lessons, and future victories you haven't even reached yet. What feels like the end is often just a pause, an interruption, not a conclusion. Zooming out gives your emotions space to calm down. In the heat of failure, your mind magnifies the worst possibilities. You start predicting permanent loss, permanent damage, permanent disappointment. But when you step back, your emotional intensity softens. You're able to think more clearly. You can distinguish between what is temporary and what is truly significant. Most of the time, failure affects only the moment, not the entire direction of your life. But you can only see that truth when you create distance from the moment itself. When you adopt a wider perspective, you also begin to notice patterns. You recognize that setbacks have shown up before in your life, and you survived them. You remember past achievements that once felt impossible. You recall struggles that seemed devastating at the time but ended up strengthening you. Zooming out brings history into the picture, and history reminds you of your resilience. You start to realize that failure is not a unique disaster. It is a familiar part of growth. You've met it before. You've overcome it before. That awareness gives you confidence for what lies ahead. Another powerful effect of zooming out is that it reduces your tendency to judge yourself harshly. When all you can see is the failure, you label yourself based on that single moment. You call yourself incapable, unprepared, or unworthy. But when you look at the bigger picture, you understand that no one reaches success without setbacks. Every skill you're learning, every challenge you're facing, and every mistake you're making is shaping you. The broader view helps you replace self-criticism with self-compassion. You stop attacking yourself for stumbling and start appreciating the fact that you're still on the path. Zooming out also helps you rediscover perspective about time. Failure often feels like it has cost you everything, your progress, your opportunity, your chance. But when you widen the timeline, you see that you have far more time ahead of you than behind. A few days, months, or even years of struggle do not erase your potential. Life is long and progress doesn't follow a straight line. Some chapters are slower, some are painful, some test you deeply, but every chapter contributes to the story. Zooming out helps you see time not as something you've lost, but as something you still have plenty of. This perspective makes decision-making easier during difficult moments. When you're too focused on the present failure, you make choices based on fear. Fear of more mistakes, fear of judgment, fear of trying again. But when you look at the whole path, you start making decisions based on direction instead of fear. You ask yourself, what will matter 5 years from now? What aligns with the bigger picture of who I'm becoming? These questions guide you toward wiser actions, not emotional reactions. Zooming out also restores your belief in possibility. When failure fills your entire field of vision, you start to think that there are no options left. But when you step back, you see multiple paths, multiple strategies, and multiple ways to begin again. The bigger picture reveals that failure is not closing doors, it's redirecting you to better ones. Sometimes the path you thought was right wasn't the one meant for you. Zooming out allows you to see that redirection clearly without panic or self-doubt. And perhaps the most important part of zooming out is this: it keeps hope alive. Hope doesn't grow in narrow spaces. It grows when you expand your view, when you remember your purpose, when you see how far you can still go. Failure may shake you, but perspective steadies you. It reminds you that you are more than this moment, that your journey is bigger than this setback, that the story is still being written. When you zoom out, you take back control. You stop letting one failure define your future and start letting the whole journey define your strength. Resilience is built through consistent action, especially when continuing feels hardest, because resilience is not something you are born with. It is something you create through repeated decisions to keep going. Most people imagine resilience as a dramatic, heroic trait that appears in moments of crisis. But the truth is much simpler. Resilience grows quietly in the small, unglamorous choices you make every day. It is built when you show up on days when your energy is low, when your confidence is shaken, and when your motivation has disappeared. These are the moments that matter most, because anyone can move forward when things are easy. What defines your strength is what you do when things become difficult. Every time you take action after a setback, you strengthen your emotional muscles. You teach yourself that you can recover, you can adapt, and you can make progress even when circumstances are not ideal. This self-training builds a deep internal belief, the belief that you are capable. And once you trust your own ability to keep moving forward, failure loses much of the power it once had over you. Instead of seeing failure as something that stops you, you begin to see it as something you can rise above. That shift in mindset is a core part of resilience. Consistent action also rewires the way your mind responds to challenges. Human brains naturally avoid discomfort. When something feels hard, the instinct is to withdraw or pause. But when you consistently choose action in difficult moments, you retrain your brain. You build a new pattern, one that says, oh, I keep going no matter how I feel. Eventually, this becomes automatic. You start responding to setbacks with action rather than hesitation. And that pattern of response becomes the foundation of resilience. Continuing when things feel hardest also helps you break the cycle of fear. Failure often brings fear with it. The fear of trying again, the fear of repeating mistakes, the fear of judgment, the fear of wasting effort. If you let that fear control you, you stop taking action and the fear becomes stronger. But when you act despite fear, you weaken it. You send a clear message to yourself: fear is not the boss, action is. With every step forward, no matter how small, the fear shrinks and your courage grows. Over time, taking action in tough moments becomes less frightening and more instinctive. Resilience is also built through consistency because consistency builds momentum. When you keep moving, even in tiny steps, you prevent yourself from falling into stagnation. Setbacks feel heavier when you stop completely. The longer you stay still, the harder it becomes to start again. But consistent action, no matter how small, keeps the engine running. Even slow progress is still progress. That sense of movement creates motivation, confidence, and clarity, which are essential for bouncing back. Another important aspect of resilience is learning through action. When you continue after failure, you give yourself more opportunities to grow. You experiment, adjust, and improve. You gather new information about what works and what doesn't. Resilience is not just about enduring pain. It's about adapting through it. People who recover quickly are not the ones who avoid mistakes. They are the ones who learn fast because they keep participating in the process. Action leads to learning, and learning leads to better outcomes. Over time, this cycle creates a stronger, more capable version of you. Resilience also forms through emotional regulation. When you force yourself to act during difficult times, you develop the ability to manage your emotions instead of being controlled by them. You learn to move forward even when you're frustrated, disappointed, embarrassed, or exhausted. This emotional independence becomes a powerful tool. It allows you to stay committed to your purpose even when your feelings fluctuate. You begin to trust your ability to function under pressure, which builds long-term mental strength. Continuing in hard moments also strengthens your sense of identity. Every time you push through difficulty, you reinforce the belief that you are someone who doesn't give up. Identity shapes behavior. If you see yourself as someone who quits easily, you behave that way. But if you see yourself as someone who keeps going, your actions align with that identity. Resilience grows when your self-image aligns with persistence. There's also a ripple effect to consistent action. The more you show up despite challenges, the more successful outcomes you eventually create, and each success, no matter how small, becomes evidence that your efforts matter. That evidence boosts your confidence, which boosts your resilience. Over time, you build a personal history of overcoming challenges. You accumulate proof that you are stronger than your setbacks. This proof becomes your fuel when you face new failures. Ultimately, resilience is built through consistent action because each action is a statement of intent. It tells the world, and more importantly yourself, that you are not finished, that you are still in the fight. That failure may have slowed you, but it hasn't stopped you. When you move forward in your hardest moments, you shape yourself into someone who cannot be broken easily. And that strength earned through persistence becomes one of the most powerful tools you carry through life. In the end, the journey of pushing through failure is not defined by a single moment of strength, but by the countless decisions you make to rise, recommit, and continue. Failure may shake your confidence, disrupt your plans, or slow your progress, but it does not decide your future unless you allow it to. What truly shapes your path is the mindset you build, the ability to treat failure as feedback, the clarity of purpose that anchors you, the structure that keeps you steady, the perspective that reminds you this moment is not your whole story, and the resilience that grows every time you take action despite the struggle. When you put all these pieces together, you realize that failure is not the opposite of success. It is part of the process that leads to it. The people who achieve meaningful things are not those who never fall, but those who refuse to stay down. They learn, adjust, and rise again with stronger focus and deeper understanding. And you have that same power within you. Your setbacks are not signals to stop, they are invitations to grow. Your challenges are not roadblocks, they are turning points. Your failures are not proof of inadequacy, they are stepping stones toward mastery. When you understand this, you no longer fear failure, you use it. You no longer question your worth, you reinforce it. And you no longer measure yourself by the moment, you measure yourself by your ability to rise from it. That is how you keep going even when failure hits hard. That is how you build a life of purpose, progress, and unshakable strength.